On today's episode, I lift my leg, I drink some water, and I sit down. Stay tuned. It's always important also to make sure that you are staying hydrated and that you're drinking water constantly as you work out. All right. Hey, welcome back for part 2, not to be confused with number 2 when we're talking about the butt. All right, so part 2 here on this, where I'm actually going to go through and start to show some of my more specific exercises I try to do to make sure my gluteus is strong and feeling good and looking good. Okay, so let me quick comments here. The gluteus, the butt, the big muscle, that's the one that's the primary importance here, maybe as far as getting that round shape from behind. There's also the gluteus medius and minimus, I believe. You can check out Sam West on YouTube. He goes through a lot of anatomy stuff. That's my source on this, all right? And that's for adduction of the leg when you're going out, okay? So that's also important. So I do a little something like that, okay? Let me get down to a few little different pieces before I start to run through and show you the exercises that I consider more specifically what I can call my gluteus legs day, okay? And I'll go through each one and explain why I do them that certain way. I'm not gonna have a long thing showing you everything, okay? So we'll try to make it brief, okay? All right, so when we're talking about that gluteus piece, right, and then the side parts, those are all important, again, about stabilization and keeping you safe and healthy and athletic and all those different pieces, okay? So another thing I want to point out here is if you are trying to focus on building your butt, clearly you can go on YouTube and type that in and you'll be inundated with a number of grow your booty and big booty and who knows what else, okay? And what tends to be in there is a lot of women showing their booties and all these various exercises, which I think are great. And I'm not going to dismiss any of those because I do think they are beneficial and helpful. And I'll explain why that's important for me. I've actually followed 2 of those women who have shown me butt exercises, right, that you wouldn't expect a 50-plus-year-old guy to be trying to do. And but I do, and so I want to give them a shout out, and that is Mary Braun, B-R-A-U-N, I believe, and Pamela Reif, R-E-I-F, which I'm sure they're super popular and maybe everybody knows about them anyways, okay? I like them because they don't do a lot of talking at all, and it's basically just do the exercise and you have a certain amount of time, and it's absolutely brutal. It is brutal. So if you think, oh, I'm not doing some whatever exercise thing with this girl here, whatever, you know, no, it'll kick your butt, okay? So check that out. Try to do one of those. Do one of those 10-minute workouts. Okay, so I wanted to point that out. And then on the flip side, you have some things that are more geared towards the men, okay? And it's about doing this, or you're going to do a deadlift and all this, and this grows your butt and all this stuff. Okay, so the way I'm approaching this is twofold, because one, I need to get my butt to even remember it's there, okay? And so I find that some of those other detailed type exercises, such as, you know, a kickback or a fire hydrant, if you're down, these are some of the terms that I've been taught when you're lifting your leg for the adduction, whatever it may be. If you do a bunch of those, I started to feel my butt on fire. Okay, in the right way, not the wrong way. And so, wow, okay, I'm actually starting to feel, you know, my butt, that I have a muscle there and whatnot. So now what I do is I try to incorporate some of those, and I might even mess around with some of that throughout the day just to make sure, hey, is my butt still here? And it helps me get that muscle primed up really well. Okay, because if I said, you know what, I'm gonna do a squat because that's beneficial for the butt, okay, and I get in there and I start doing that squat, sure, I don't know, yes, I might tighten up to get my hips to align before I start squatting, whatever it is, but throughout that squat process, there's a lot more going on than me just feeling that butt area. Okay, so I do these different exercises first to kind of get that really going, really get that to engage. Sort of almost like I wanted to get it pre-exhausted almost, so that so I know I'm there. And this is, I think, hugely important when it comes to this specific muscle. It goes across the board for many muscles. If you don't feel your chest when you're pressing, yeah, that's a problem. Okay, if you don't feel your bicep contracting when you're trying to curl, that's a problem. So it's the same with your butt as well. Okay, you can kind of go through the motions and get results, right? But you really need to feel what is going on. And that's why I do some of that. Okay, so I start off with some of those to get things fired up. Then I move on to some other heavier pieces. And like I said, the ones that are more geared towards the men and growing their butts, right, are more heavy lifting type things. And I agree with that. I think you do need that sort of element of progressive overload. It's just my opinion. I think if I sat here and did 100 kickbacks focusing on my butt every day, I don't think my butt is going to get as big or strong as perhaps some of the pictures of the people who are doing the exercises, because maybe genetically they already have that kind of butt. I get it, right? If you get that, odds are I'm not going to have, you know, some big girly butt, because I'm not a big girly butt guy. I'm a guy with a butt that's different. So, you know, I don't think that's really going to happen. So I think there's a different kind of response that goes on there. So if you're a guy, certainly you want your butt to be big and strong, not in the giant booty way, okay? And so that's super important. So the other exercises I do are about that. It is about like, okay, you are trying to build the muscle, okay, to a point in which, yeah, the size perhaps gets larger because you're building the muscle, and it's not so much about staying kind of fit or tone and whatnot, okay? And it's not about having that sort of pump in there where you do a bunch of, you know, fire hydrants and leg lifts and whatever, I don't know, and you know, oh, your butt looks really good for a day or two until that wears down. I'm looking for long-term strength, development, and muscle mass that goes on there. So it's blending those two approaches to try to make sure that your butt is fit, strong, tone, etc., and still looks good. All right? Maybe what we'll do here is we'll get down to it, and I will do a little bit of a demonstration of one of my first exercises. Okay, so let me show you something here. There's the bar that goes across here that I have set up on my rig, okay? And in my demonstration of my kickbacks and my side, okay, I go up against this, okay, for a reason. And that's because I'm trying to keep myself pressed rigid. So I'm pushing with my hip, okay? And when you push with your hip, what are you doing? Naturally, you have to engage your glutes, okay, to do that, because that's what that muscle does. It helps push this forward, okay? So I keep it fixed, and then when I do my lifts and I put my leg up, I try to stay up so that I'm trying to keep that angle tightened, like I'm closing it up so that I feel that butt muscle. Not so I'm bent over like this and then it's more like I'm just teetering. So that's why I do it this way. You can do it on the floor, and that will give you a different kind of experience as well, all right? And just like with the side one, right, it's gonna be the same thing. I'm going to want to try to stay here. I'll like hold this like tight against myself, okay? Because again, now we're doing more of a medius minimus here on this side, and we're gonna go up. And I try to go at least, you know, kind of like, I don't know, hope that's horizontal. Yeah, so try to get to that height when I do it, okay? And then back down. And typically what I do with this actually is I do 3 sets of 30 with each one, alternating each leg, okay? And that typically gets enough going there where I'm starting to feel something going on in my butt muscles, okay? So I hope that explains how I do it. But again, you can look on YouTube for some of these other people and see all those different things. Those are the 2 ones I do that aren't necessarily aimed at a weight and a progressive overload. But I will mention this. What I'm doing here is I actually have ankle weights on. Okay, they're my wife's, and I put them on, and I use those. And so I have added, as I go up, to have an ankle weight. You can set up a band. You know, that didn't necessarily feel very comfortable for me to try to have more resistance. I like the ankle weights. It just makes it easy. I need to get some more so I can add up on that. So there is a way to kind of progressively overload with that. But again, I don't see myself getting to a place where I've got 20 pounds here and I'm doing one of these things. I don't know. Who knows? But that's just another little side tip here. And also, before maybe I get going any further, is to share, being older, some of my joints are worn out, as I think I've mentioned, and certainly my knees. So I do wear compression leggings, and I do wear knee sleeves whenever I'm doing any of my leg workout routine. I got them on under my sweatpants. If you feel embarrassed, you can do that. Wear some shorts. Shorts are long enough as it is, right? You see plenty of guys doing that, wearing compression leggings and shorts. Stuff like that. I feel like it really has helped me a lot in my experience to have those. So that's just a little side tip in case you do have a struggle there with some of that. You can experiment or check it out and see if it's something that, you know, feels better for you or something like that. Okay? All right, so we'll move on from here. I wanted to add a couple of different things for you to know when it comes to me doing these. Okay, for one, when I use this bar standing up this way, it helps keep me from cheating, versus when I've tried to do some of the stuff on the ground. I might rotate more or push with the other leg. So this forces me to be more form correct with the exercise I'm doing. Two, I've played around with, like when I do the kickback one, how I use my other foot. If I try to push with my heel, I feel it kind of differently than if I do with my toe. And that's something kind of interesting that maybe you could try out and see if that matters to you. Also, look, this is an exercise that may look like whatever or silly or whatever, but it's super important, okay? Because again, trying to get your legs to even go that high when you're older, or heck, when you're a guy, okay, is important. Because when you're a kid or when you're younger, you do all kinds of things that, you know what, your legs might go in that way. Whether you go snowboarding or bike riding, whatever it is, you're using your parts differently. And then as you get older and maybe you're not doing those things, you start to lose that connection also. So doing some of these exercises, it's also about you being able to still move. Still being able to move your limbs, okay, especially your legs, which are usually important. So those are just a few things I wanted to add on here for you when it comes to maybe some tips when it comes to doing these two exercises, the kickback and the side kick is what I call it. Okay, I think that's it. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next exercise, and I'll explain some of the changes I've made there and a little bit of the variation so that I feel as though it's more beneficial for me. Okay. Okay, so the next exercise I'm going to be doing that I use for my butt, okay, I changed. I do dumbbells. And I used to do something more like a Romanian deadlift, okay, right? So where you stay stiff and you're bending nice and slow and then you're coming back up, right? And so what are you doing? Hip hingement, okay? You're turning, you're focusing on the glutes. But the Romanian deadlift is also very good for your hamstrings, and a lot of people use it to build and work their hamstrings as well. Okay, that's not something I really wanted to focus on. I really wanted to try to feel it more so in my butt. And I may be somebody, sometimes we're a little bit dominant in different areas. I may be more dominant in my hamstrings versus my butt, and so it weakens. Also, maybe my lower back. It's difficult to know. So I'm going to demonstrate again what I'm doing and why I'm doing. I'm going to be grabbing these 50-pound dumbbells, and then I will give a more detailed explanation as I do a couple of them to show you, okay? So, all right. I'll try to stand so I'm kind of in frame here. I don't have a wide stance. I kind of point my toes out a little bit, because from what I've heard is that if your toes are pointed out a little bit more, it's supposed to create more gluteal activation, which is the butt. Okay, I do tighten it first and I try to stay straight. So now what I do, as you can see, I kind of tend to go more so like it's almost like a deadlift. Like I'm doing a deadlift. And then what I'm also doing is I'm trying to push up really quickly. So it's almost like what I'm trying to do is jump. And I find that when I'm trying to like do that, I'm pinching my butt. I know that sounds terrible, but that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to squeeze that. I'm trying to focus on keeping it tight the whole time as I go down, and then I'm keeping it tight and focusing on trying to again get my pelvis to move forward, right? Which is part of that, what the butt does. And so butt does hip impingement, right? It's the butt's job to help you get up, stuff like that. Okay, so that's why I do it that way. So it's almost like a deadlift, which as we know, a deadlift does help build your gluteus, okay? But what I'm trying to focus on is the butt. So I'm not doing a huge weight, and I'm not just trying to get that weight up, in which I'm using a lot of other muscles, right? I'm still using other muscles, but it's weird that I found that like once I tried to stay focused on keeping this tight all the way down and then really pushing up hard, for whatever reason, it feels like my butt gets a lot more activation. And again with that, I'm doing the 50 pound and I do 3 sets of 20 with that. Okay? So that's what I'm doing. We'll move on to the next exercise in a little bit. Okay, so the next exercise I'm going to do, I don't recommend to anybody. Okay, I do it as a weird combination sort of exercise. It's what I call a mini deadlift hip thrust. Okay, and what I do here is I'm just trying to like focus on that finishing off part. Like if you're doing a deadlift and you finally lock out, so to speak, okay, and you got your hip moving in, right, like this, so your butt is pulling that, okay, and that's the only part. When I do a whole deadlift, I don't particularly feel like my butt's driving that whole exercise. It's more so as I maybe get towards the end and I can push that hip out, right, because that's part of that action that the glute does, okay, and that's why a hip thrust. And I try to stay back a little bit, and so it's a short range of motion, but it's a ton of weight. Okay, it just looks silly and stupid, all right? It's like if you did a shoulder shrug with a barbell, and at some point, you're gonna end up with a ton of weight on there. It just looks silly. That's why I use dumbbells on that. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about this exercise, and I'm just being fair because I show it. And it's one of the things I do. And here's why I also do it. Because one could argue, well, why don't you just do a deadlift, etc., etc. Okay, I'm following a pattern. I start off with the one exercise in which I'm doing the side kicks or the side laterals, right? Both 3 sets by 30 on that. Feeling a lot. I'm feeling the butt muscle specifically really getting a pump and going on. Then I go over and I do the dumbbells, and I do that sort of, not a Romanian deadlift, it's more like a little, normal deadlift. Not all the way down, just past knee with the dumbbell, and then I push up really quickly, again, trying to focus on that. Okay, so I do that. I do 3 sets of 20 with that. Then I come over here and I do a lot of weight that's very hard, and I do like 3 sets of 10. Okay, so if what you're noticing, I hope, here is that I'm hitting the same muscle back to back to back to back, progressively making it harder. Okay, that's why. So for me, I really feel like, okay, wow, I really feel like this is just focusing on my butt. Okay, so I will leave it with the demonstration that I showed, which I think didn't have a ton of weight on it, which is fine, just so you could see it. And then we'll move on from there. Okay. Okay, so the last exercise I do that's primarily focused on trying to get my glutes to get a lot of work is what I call a sumo deadlift. Again, this is one of those ones where you could look online on the YouTube, and there's a lot of guys out there that show that specific exercise in different ways. That is different than what I'm doing. I limit my range, so I use the bench, so it's like a box squat. And so since I can't really let the dumbbell hang down holding it, I hold it up near my chest or near my pelvis. I've actually found that as I've lowered it down, it's a little bit better for me, because then again, it's about like almost like that sort of hip thrust piece where you're kind of pushing your hips forward to get yourself to be straight, okay? And I use my bench and I place my feet wide and apart in a sumo stance. So if you're not familiar with that, then you could just look up sumo squat, or sumo deadlift, or sumo wrestling. I don't know, okay? So whatever you're gonna do. But like I said, you saw it already. I showed, or maybe not, we'll see how I edit this, how I'm doing it, okay? And again, it's to stay focused on contracting your butt, squeezing it the whole time, down and up. You are focusing on driving everything with your butt all of the time, okay? And I guess in a way I didn't think of before, the way I do these exercises is I don't have a huge amount of rest in between them, and I go from one to the other to the other. So it'd be like almost like I'm supersetting my butt, okay? So maybe that's another way to think about how this might be different than some of the other exercises. I'm not going from one exercise to this and that, and it's not as focused. It's kind of like I'm trying to superset my butt here. Okay, so this is the last one, or it was the last one, I don't know, okay? So maybe I might have a few more words to say. Yeah, I did remember. There's a few more things I do when it comes to the sumo squat with a deadlift. I do that, just to let you know, I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 sets of 10 with as little rest as possible for myself. Maybe to get some water or to write down that I did 10 on my notebook where I track everything, right? And again, I try to stay back, okay? And I try to focus on pushing, driving the hips forward. That's what I've been looking for this whole time, driving the hips forward. Okay, all right, I hope you learned something there. Okay. Hip thrust! Ah! Hip thrust! Ah! GoPro, stop recording. GoPro, stop recording. All right. Hey, what about the hip thrust? I know that's what everyone wanted to see, right? It's the only reason you're here is to see the hip thrust. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I don't do the hip thrust. I don't know if I already talked about this. I'm not a fan of the hip thrust for myself because it's just too difficult of a maneuvering situation for me to get my shoulders placed properly onto the bench. Hurts my shoulders to get on there. My knees don't particularly care for a high degree of angle. And of course, the feeling of the bar digging into the middle of your body. And yes, I put a pad. I've done it. I've tried it. I've seen other people put lots of pads in between their hip and the bar to enjoy the wonderful hip thrust. So I don't know. I feel like it's an exercise that is like, whoa, like everybody's like the hip thrust. And clearly it's been shown that there's a lot of, I guess, EMG activation in the glute. Awesome. If you can do that and you're like young and awesome and whatnot, and that all works for you, and where you just, maybe you like just to go into the gym and do a bunch of hip thrusts, right? I don't know, maybe you like that. That's okay. It's okay. I don't mind. Not for me. All right, so I'm sorry to disappoint. YouTube that. Look up hip thrust. All right. I think the main guy who really pioneered and blew this thing up is Brent Contreras. I think he's the butt man. So you know, you can check that out if you really want to get into doing some hip thrusting. All right. Okay. Thank you.